Welcome to Chronicles and Legends. Please hit that subscribe and let us know where in the world are you tuning in from. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Blood Panic begins. In the year 1721, in the frozen hills of East Prussia, something ancient crawled out of the ground and fed on the living. Graves were disturbed, corpses were mutilated, and terrified villagers whispered the same word again and again. Vampire. This wasn't the plot of a horror novel. It was a real historical event, and it sparked one of the most terrifying outbreaks of supernatural hysteria in European history. A true vampire panic. Long before vampires were polished, seductive, creatures of pop culture, they were monstrous revenants, feared in folklore stretching back centuries. But in the early 18th century, something changed. The fear wasn't just whispered around campfires, it went viral. Between 1721 and 1734, reports of vampire attacks surged across Eastern Europe, especially in Transylvania, Serbia, East Prussia, and the fringes of the Habsburg Empire. It started quietly. A villager would fall ill. Then another would be found pale, lifeless, drained of blood. Locals began exhuming the dead, and what they found inside those graves only fanned the flames. The first major incident came from the village of Kisiljevo in modern-day Serbia. A man named Peter Blagojevich had recently died at the age of 62. That should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Just days after his burial, Peter's son claimed to have seen his father standing at his doorway, asking for food. His son refused. The next morning, he was found dead. And then, others began to fall ill. 10 people reportedly died under mysterious circumstances, all claiming to have been visited by Peter before their deaths. Their bodies were pale, bloodless. Fear swept the village. Villagers demanded Peter's corpse be exhumed. When they opened the coffin, they recoiled in horror. Peter's body was not decomposed. His hair and nails had grown. Fresh blood stained his lips. Convinced he was undead, they drove a wooden stake through his chest. According to the report, blood gushed from his mouth and ears. He screamed, and then he was truly dead. Another infamous case emerged just a few years later, also in Serbia, involving a former soldier named Arnold Powell. Arnold was a man haunted by his past. Years earlier, he claimed to have been attacked by a vampire near Kosovo. To protect himself, he followed old folklore rituals, eating soil from the vampire's grave and smearing himself with its blood. But it didn't work. Not long after, returning home and taking up life as a farmer, Powell fell from a hay wagon and died instantly. Just like Blagojevich, his story should have ended there. But soon after his death, villagers began dying, fast. They all reported the same dreamlike visits, the same feelings of suffocation, the same sudden wasting away. The fear returned. When Arnold's body was exhumed, it showed no signs of decay. His skin was flush, his veins were filled with fluid blood, and just like Blagojevich, he was staked, decapitated, and burned. But the panic didn't stop. More graves were opened. More corpses were found guilty. The soil of Eastern Europe became a battleground, not between armies, but between the living and the supposed undead. As the panic spread, one man decided to investigate the madness, not with pitchforks, but with philosophy. Dom Augustin Calmet, a respected French Benedictine monk, scholar, and theologian, began compiling reports of these vampire outbreaks. He read letters, interviewed witnesses, and documented village accounts across Poland, Hungary, Moravia, and beyond. His findings were so shocking, even the great philosopher Voltaire took notice. In 1746, Calmet published a detailed treatise compiling real eyewitness testimonies and autopsy reports from the vampire panic. Voltaire, who normally dismissed superstition, couldn't ignore the scale of the hysteria. In his philosophical dictionary, he wrote, These vampires were corpses who went out of their graves at night to suck the blood of the living, while the sucking corpses grew fat, got rosy, and enjoyed an excellent appetite. This wasn't just folklore. These were official military reports signed by surgeons, priests, and even local nobility. But the scariest part? We're just getting started. Because what Calmet uncovered next would challenge everything we thought we knew about life, death, and what might be waiting underneath. Chapter 2. The Count Who Hunted the Dead. By the 1730s, the vampire panic was no longer just a local superstition. It had caught the attention of empires, and with empires come armies, and with armies come reports. One of the most chilling, vampire investigations didn't come from peasants with pitchforks, but from an elite military officer named Count de Cabreras, a man assigned by imperial decree to uncover the truth. When news of mysterious deaths and undead sightings reached the Austrian Empire, the authorities could no longer ignore it. Villagers were panicking, rumors were spreading, corpses were piling up, and not all of them were staying buried. The army was sent in. Enter Count de Cabreras, a high-ranking noble, well-educated, calm under pressure, but nothing could prepare him for what he was about to witness. In one infamous report documented by Dom Calmet, a soldier was stationed at the home of a Haidamack peasant on the edge of Hungary. One evening, as they sat eating supper, a stranger entered the room and calmly joined them at the table. Everyone in the household froze, but the soldier, a newcomer, was confused. He had no idea he was staring at a dead man. The next morning, the peasant, the homeowner, was dead. Shocked and suspicious, the soldier told his regiment. The tale quickly reached higher command, and so Count de Cabreras was deployed, flanked by officers, surgeons, and a court notary. This wasn't just a ghost story, it was a military investigation. When the Count arrived at the village, he ordered depositions from every witness. The accounts were eerily consistent. Everyone swore that the visitor was the peasant's father, who had died 10 years earlier. He had come back, and he had given his son notice of his own death. The Count ordered the grave exhumed. What they found was impossible. The body appeared as if it had been buried only hours ago. The skin was intact, the face peaceful, and the blood still fluid. The Count, trained to deal with uprisings and saboteurs, was now signing an order to behead a corpse and bury it again. But the madness was just beginning. Soon after, villagers reported a second case, another long-dead man returning to his old home. This time, it was even worse. The man's first visit, he latched onto his brother's neck and drained his blood. His second, he attacked his own child. The third, he killed a servant. 3 visits, 3 deaths, no survivors. The Count ordered another exhumation. Same result, no decomposition, liquid blood. This time, a nail was driven through the skull before reburial. But the Count wasn't satisfied. Third corpse, dead for over 16 years, was dug up and found guilty of vampirism. He too was believed to have murdered children from beyond the grave. His sentence, to be burned. So, what exactly was going on? Today, science might offer explanations: misidentified diseases, premature burial, natural corpse preservation. But in the 18th century, none of these answers existed. The villagers weren't superstitious fools. They were reacting to what they saw with their own eyes. And the Austrian authorities, instead of dismissing it, documented it. These weren't rumors. These were sworn military depositions, signed and sealed, entered into official imperial records. Back in France, Dom Calmet received these reports. He didn't blindly believe them, but he didn't dismiss them either. As a man of both faith and reason, Calmet walked a tightrope. He wrote, "There is a great deal of smoke, and therefore, perhaps some fire." He wasn't claiming vampires were real in the Hollywood sense, but he believed something unnatural was happening, and he wasn't the only one. Europe was starting to wonder, what if the dead can come back? As the vampire panic peaked, it caused a divide between church, state, and science. Some claimed these reports were proof of the devil's work. Others believed vampires were part of God's punishment for sin. A few, like Calmet, simply asked for more evidence. But one thing was certain. The world was no longer laughing at vampires. They were afraid. And in the final chapter, we uncover how these reports influenced everything from modern vampire legends to Bram Stoker himself. Chapter 3. From the Grave to Gothic. From darkened village roads to imperial courts, vampire panic had already bled into every level of society. But what came next would immortalize the undead forever. The vampire trials, the grave diggings, the military investigations, they were real events, documented and preserved in European records. But as the 18th century gave way to the 19th, something curious happened. The vampire moved out of the grave and into the imagination. Writers across Europe began to rework the tales of Arnold Powell, Peter Plagojewicz, and Calmet's spectres. The real horrors of Eastern Europe became the seeds of Western Gothic fiction. Enter 1819, the year English author John Polidori published The Vampire. Unlike the crude, decaying corpses from Serbian folklore, Polidori's vampire was elegant, seductive, and aristocratic, a complete rebrand. No longer a bloated peasant in a grave, now a charming nobleman in a velvet cloak. This character, inspired by Lord Byron himself, laid the foundation for the modern vampire archetype, and it would only get darker. In 1897, the transformation reached its peak. Bram Stoker introduced the world to Count Dracula, the definitive vampire of our time. But here's what most people don't know. Stoker didn't invent Dracula from scratch. He pulled directly from the same historical vampire cases we've explored, including the Calmet records. Stoker even cited evidence from the vampire epidemics in Hungary, Serbia, and Wallachia, the exact regions we covered in Chapter 1 and 2. The bloodsucker from beyond the grave had become a cultural icon, thanks to centuries of panic, paranoia, and storytelling. So what happened to Dom Calmet? Despite facing criticism from both the Church and Enlightenment thinkers, his treatise on vampires became one of the most widely read books on supernatural phenomena in Europe. His work did something remarkable. It blurred the line between theology and science, superstition, and skepticism. He didn't scream, "Vampires are real." He calmly asked, if so many claim to see them, can we afford to ignore it? It's a question still asked today, about everything from ghosts to UFOs. Why did this story stick? Because it tapped into something primal, the fear of death, the fear of the unknown, and perhaps the fear that those we bury aren't always gone. For the people of 18th century Europe, vampires weren't fantasy. They were a terrifying explanation for something real, unexplained death. No medicine, no science, only shadows. Your loved one dies suddenly. You see a figure at the window. You dig up a body, and it looks alive. What would you believe? These weren't just bedtime stories. They were survival mechanisms. And now, the vampire is everywhere. From Bela Lugosi's haunting stare in Dracula, 1931, to Twilight, True Blood, An Interview with the Vampire. The undead continue to evolve. But if you peel back the layers of Hollywood makeup, beneath the satin capes and sparkling eyes, lies Peter Plagojewicz, Arnold Powell, and the villages of Serbia. The roots are real. In a world saturated with myths, only a few stories endure for centuries. The vampire endures because it wasn't just invented, it was remembered. Calmet's writings, the military investigations, the terrified villagers. These are not tales of fiction. They are history blurred by shadow, and maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it scarier. Still think vampires are only in the movies? Let us know what you believe in the comments.